Statewide races and some local races, a lot to talk about. We're going to try to go fast because we've got a lot to squeeze in, from the governor's race to the attorney general's race to U.S. House of Representatives on down to circuit attorney in the city. We'll start with, though, some information, some feedback we got on Twitter this week. We said, which local races are you watching the most? Not surprisingly, I guess, at least if you're judging by what we're seeing on TV, Missouri governor, that's the race that a lot of people are talking about. So let's talk about that, especially on the Republican side, particularly on the Republican side. We've got 4 candidates: John Brunner, multimillionaire businessman; Eric Greitens, the former Navy SEAL; Catherine Hanaway, the former U.S. attorney and former House Speaker here in Missouri; and then Peter Kinder, the longtime lieutenant governor. All pretty neck and neck, judging by some polls we've seen recently, and pretty similar too, it seems like. From Dave, you and I watched a debate last night. They didn't really sound that much different on that many issues. What do you expect between now and August 2nd from these candidates?
I expect a lot of things that are very negative on the air, but also a lot of mailers that come into boxes, people's mailboxes, some door-to-door stuff, some telephones. There's a lot of money in this race to use a lot of technology to get a little bit of an advantage in this race, and a little advantage goes a long way in a 4-way race.
Are they distinguishing themselves from each other at all?
Yeah, well, see, philosophically, they're all pretty close. So since they don't have many differences on the issues, it's all about personality and character. So that's why you're seeing all this stuff basically saying, my opponent is a crook. Do not elect him or her. And my opponent has done this or that. Do not elect him or her. And it's, if you notice, nobody's talking about, in their ads, they're not talking about right to work or the state's economy, or even the social issues, or a little bit about guns, but just so you know, we're for guns, and there's all 4 of them. But that is one of the things that has happened with this race. They've spent a ton of money, $10 million just this month. Which is close, I think, to the record. I don't think it's the record. If you take inflation into account, 1992 is still the worst.
Well, let's talk about that.
But it's crazy.
Because Tony, well, you say crazy. Tony, you said it was obscene in a recent article.
I can't even think of a strong enough word to describe what we're starting to see in Missouri in terms of the amount of money that is spent in races. The governor's race, the attorney general's race, there's been more than $10 million raised already in that race, and that's unheard of in terms of a lower ticket statewide race.
Where's it coming from?
It's coming from, in John Brunner's case, it's his own pocket. In Eric Greitens' case, it's millionaires and billionaires from all over the country. In Peter Kinder's case, it's one billionaire from Southwest Missouri, and in Catherine Hanaway's case, it's one billionaire from right here in St. Louis. And so it's a bunch of wealthy people taking advantage of the fact that Missouri is one of the few states in the country that has no campaign limits whatsoever. And then you add Citizens United that allows somewhat anonymous and unlimited money going to certain types of political action committees nationally. That's how Eric Greitens was able to take in the largest individual donation to a individual candidate for office in Missouri history, $1.9 million from a political action committee, in which we won't know who that money actually comes from, if ever, not until after the election.
Yeah, the money has been declared to be free speech, but nobody knows who's talking at this point in the case of these organizations. We can tell a lot more from the people who are putting lots of money into Hanaway's campaign, for example, or we can tell that Brunner is putting money into his campaign. But I think what's really troubling is that there are so many contributors whose names we just don't know. We don't know where the money is coming from.
So why does that matter? Not to ask a dumb question, but why does this bother you guys?
Well, I think there's information out there that voters need to have, because if someone is a front to a different kind of interest that perhaps no one knows about, I think people might base their vote on that. And because of the way we do our filings, and we don't ask for a lot of information and we give people lots of time to compile it, you can play these sort of shell games where you can kind of hide money and hide donors until the very last minute.
So it's the anonymity that bothers you more than the money?
Well, the money bothers me too.
They both bother me, but the anonymity is what makes it worse, and here's an example. So Eric Greitens got the largest check that we're talking about, $1.9 million, and it's the largest one that's anonymous. We don't know where that money came from. if you follow the political discussions on Twitter and Facebook, for instance, from Republican operatives, there is a movement right now to really make sure that Republican voters know before Tuesday that Eric Greitens spent a bunch of time in the White House, used to be a Democrat, and used to like Barack Obama. In Eric Greitens' most recent ad, he calls Barack Obama the worst president the country's ever seen. And so knowing where that money comes from when you have an unknown candidate who's trying to define himself for the first time in front of the electorate helps voters be able to determine, is this guy telling me the truth? Who's really supporting him? What might I expect if he's actually the next governor?
And it's not just the governor's race.
No, and this is something that some experts and others had been expecting the last couple of years, but this year is the first time you're really seeing it in such huge amounts from these anonymous groups. I mean, basically, they've organized under certain parts of the IRS code that allows them never to identify their donors or to identify them like months from now. I mean, without boring with the details. But the bottom line is, there's all sorts of rumors about Greitens' money. Is it him? Is it somebody else? And in the same way, there have been these anti-Bruner ads that were running for weeks. No one will probably ever know who was behind those ads. That group spent millions. Nobody's going to know who it is. And in the case of the Attorney General's race, you've got a whole bunch of several groups that are targeting one of the candidates.
Before we move, I want to go to
Right.
Attorney, but real quick, do we have any favorites? Who do you think pulls it out on the Republican side for governor? Is it too close to call?
Well, and I want to emphasize, polls and primaries are notoriously inaccurate.
Okay.
Because primaries often have such low turnout. It depends on who turns out, and there's no ballot issues. This is the first time since '98 there hasn't been a major ballot issue.
Although I think I heard today the
primary.
Secretary of State is expecting higher than 2012 on Tuesday at 30%.
I don't buy it, but I know that, but I don't buy it.
Okay.
But my point is that you've got nothing else to bring people to the polls, so you may just have diehards, and they're predicting lower than expected, lower turnout in St. Louis County. They're only predicting like 25%. If it's 31% statewide, that means a bunch of the rural counties that are mainly Republican are going to be turning out in big numbers if that happens. So I think that I just remember the 2012 polls that had Bruner with a comfortable lead in the U.S. Senate race going into the election day, and we all know how that turned out.
Okay. All right.